What if the place you called home, the walls you trusted, the rooms you knew by heart, the roof that was supposed to protect you, was actually the source of every single thing wrong in your life? What if a house didn't just contain your memories, but consumed them? What if ambition, obsession, and the desperate human need to belong somewhere could all be destroyed, not by a villain, not by a monster, not by some outside force, but by four walls and a front door? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going deep, and I mean deep, into one of the most hauntingly beautiful, most quietly devastating, most criminally underappreciated animated anthology films of the last decade. We're talking about The House. Now, before you click away thinking, animated? That's not for me. Hold on. Just hold on. Because this is not a children's movie. This is not a feel-good animated feature. This is something else entirely. Something that will sit with you for days, maybe weeks, after you watch it. Something that creeps under your skin the way cold air seeps through the cracks of an old house in the dead of winter. The House is a 2022 Netflix stop-motion anthology film, directed by a team of extraordinarily talented filmmakers, Emma DeSwaff and Mark James Rulsch, Nikki Lindrith, and Paloma Baeza, and what they've created together is something I genuinely believe deserves to be studied in film school. Not just for its animation, which is breathtaking in its own right, but for its storytelling. For its themes. For the courage it takes to make something this strange, this melancholy, and this honest about the human condition. 3 stories. 3 eras in time. 1 house. And at the center of all of it, an examination of desire, of what we sacrifice for the things we want, and what happens when we finally get them. So buckle in. Get comfortable. Pour yourself something warm. Because we are going to break down every scene, every character, every hidden meaning, and every gorgeous, haunting frame of The House. And I promise you, by the time we're done here, you will see this film in a completely different way. Let's get into it. Section 2, Movie Overview. The House dropped on Netflix on January 14, 2022. And when I say dropped, I mean it landed quietly, without a massive marketing campaign, without celebrity voices plastered across a billboard, without any of the usual noise that Hollywood uses to get people into seats. It arrived almost humbly. And that humility, that understated confidence in its own vision, is absolutely part of its identity. The film is a British production, produced by Nexus Studios, which is a London-based animation company that's been doing boundary-pushing work for years. The 3 directors, Emma DeSwaff and Mark James Rulsch for the first segment, Nikki Lindrith for the second, and Paloma Baeza for the third, each brought their own distinct visual and emotional sensibility to their stories, while the whole thing is held together thematically by writer Enda Walsh, an Irish playwright of serious reputation. Walsh wrote the screenplays for all 3 stories, and his influence is unmistakable. There's a theatrical quality to the dialogue, a poetic darkness to the construction, a sense that every word means something beyond its surface. Now, the voice cast for this one is deliberately low-key. We're talking about talented British actors, Mia Goth, Claudie Blackley, Matthew Good, Mark Heap, Jarvis Cocker, Helena Bonham Carter, Paul Kay, Sven Walter, Susan Wokoma, and others, doing quiet, naturalistic, emotionally complex work. Nobody is performing. Nobody is doing the big animated movie voice. These are restrained, intimate, sometimes barely above a whisper performances, and they work perfectly with the stop-motion aesthetic. Because stop-motion, and specifically the kind of stop-motion used here, has a texture to it, a handmade quality, a slight uncanniness in the way figures move, that lends itself beautifully to stories about discomfort, about the uncanny, about the feeling that something is just slightly wrong with the world you're inhabiting. The animation itself is extraordinary. The figures are made of wool-like fabric, giving them a soft, almost tactile quality that contrasts brilliantly with the psychological horror lurking beneath the surface of each story. The house itself, rendered with meticulous detail in each segment, is almost a character in its own right. Its rooms breathe. Its walls seem to shift. Its architecture communicates mood, power, and menace in ways that live-action sets rarely achieve. When The House released, the critical reception was warm but considered. The general consensus was something like, brilliant but strange. Challenging but rewarding. Not for everyone, but deeply, unforgettably for someone. And that someone kept growing as word of mouth spread through the months that followed. On Rotten Tomatoes, it holds a 95% critical approval rating, which is extraordinary. On Letterboxd, a platform populated by serious cinephiles, it has a cult-level following that grows every single month. People who watch it tend to feel something, and then they need to talk about it. Today, we're going to talk about it thoroughly. Section 3, Full Story Breakdown. Story 1, And Heard Within, A Lies Spun. Let's start at the beginning. And the beginning of the house is, right from the first frame, haunting. We open in the 19th century. Immediately, you can feel it. The muted palette, the candle-lit interiors, the wool-textured fabric of the characters' clothing, it all speaks of an era that is gone, of a world that operates on different social mechanics, different hierarchies, different fears. We meet the Raymond family. There's Mabel, the young daughter, our emotional anchor for this first story. There's her father, Raymond, a man of modest means, working hard, struggling quietly. Her mother. A small sibling. They live in a cramped but cozy cottage, a home that is clearly poor by the standards of the time, but unmistakably a home. There is warmth here. There is love. There is a domesticity that, even through the slightly eerie lens of the stop-motion aesthetic, reads as genuine. And then, as it always does in fairy tales and in real life, something arrives to disturb it. A man named Van Schoonbeek appears. He's an aristocrat. Wealthy, imposing, draped in the authority that wealth gives to people in this particular era. And he offers Raymond something extraordinary, a house. Not just any house. A great, beautiful, sprawling house, designed by the architects Metrins, built on a nearby hill. A house of extraordinary beauty and ambition. And Van Schoonbeek offers it to Raymond and his family for nothing. For free. Now. Pay attention here. Because this is the first great moment of psychological complexity in the film. Raymond's initial reaction is suspicious. He's not stupid. He knows that nothing comes for free. He knows that a man like Van Schoonbeek does not simply give houses to peasant families out of the goodness of his heart. Something is wrong about this offer. Something doesn't add up. But then, and this is where the film gets you, Penny, Raymond's wife, becomes enchanted. She sees it. The grandeur, the possibility, the escape from their cramped, modest existence. She talks to Raymond. She works on him. She reminds him of all the things they don't have, all the ways their children deserve better, all the opportunity that is just sitting there, right in front of them. And Raymond gives in. This is heartbreaking in a very specific way. Because you understand it completely. You understand the temptation. You understand the rationalization. You understand how a man can convince himself that what feels wrong is actually right, if the reward is great enough, if the person he loves wants it badly enough. The family moves into the great house. And immediately, something is off. The house is enormous. Cavernous. Its rooms are vast and cold and excessive in ways that feel designed not for human comfort but for something else. For show. For performance. The ceilings are too high. The corridors are too long. The furniture is too grand. Every room communicates a particular kind of emptiness, the emptiness that comes not from poverty but from excess, from having more space than you know what to do with, more beauty than you have warmth to fill it with. Mabel feels it immediately. She's a child, and children in films like this are always the ones who perceive the truth that adults are too dazzled, or too desperate, to see. She wanders the halls at night. She hears things. She feels things. She is not afraid exactly, but she is aware in a way that her parents seem to have lost the capacity to be. And then, and this is where the first story starts to move into something genuinely disturbing, the workers arrive. Smetrins, the architect, shows up. And he's brought people with him. People who, under the guise of completing the house, installing finishing touches, adding final details, never leave. They fill the rooms. They take over spaces. They are everywhere. And Raymond and Penny, increasingly overwhelmed by the house, increasingly absorbed into the social performance that living in such a place demands, fail to notice. Or, worse, they notice and don't care. There's a sequence in the middle of this first story that is one of the most quietly horrifying things I've ever seen in an animated film. Mabel is moving through the house, and she begins to realize that the servants, the workers, the people Smetrins brought, they are becoming permanent. They are occupying the house in a way that begins to crowd out the family. But more than that, Raymond and Penny are changing. The house is changing them. The grandeur, the social position, the performance of wealth and refinement, it's hollowing them out. The warmth she knew in the cottage is gone. The connection between her parents is fraying. The simple, imperfect, real love of their old life is being replaced by something colder, shinier, and deeply, deeply wrong. And then comes the dinner party. Oh, the dinner party. This sequence is masterful. Smetrins has organized an evening gathering in the house, a display of the house's magnificence, a social performance, and the guest list is entirely Van Schoonbeek's world. Aristocrats, wealthy associates, people who belong in a house like this. And Raymond and Penny sit at the head of their own table feeling, and looking, desperately out of place. They're wearing the right clothes. They're sitting in the right seats. But they don't belong, and everyone knows it, and the film lets this truth land with excruciating, wordless precision. Mabel watches all of this. And Mabel begins to understand, with the terrible clarity that children sometimes have, that something has been taken from her family. Not stolen in the obvious way, not grabbed or seized, but offered, accepted, and then slowly extracted, like something being drawn out of a wound. As the story progresses, the house becomes more and more occupied by Smetrins' people. The family retreats to smaller and smaller spaces within their own home. And Raymond, poor, foolish, well-meaning Raymond, still doesn't see it. He's too invested in the idea of what the house represents to acknowledge what the house is doing. Then comes the ending of this first story, and it is devastating. Mabel discovers the truth about the house, or rather, she discovers enough of the truth to understand the full horror of their situation. The house was never a gift. It was a trap. A beautiful, elaborate, architectural trap. And Van Schoonbeek's purpose, never made fully explicit, which is part of what makes it so unsettling, was to take something from the Raymond family that cannot be returned. Their simplicity. Their authenticity. Their belonging to themselves rather than to a place. The final images of this story, Mabel in the house, her parents absorbed into a world that is no longer theirs, the house vast and cold and triumphant around them, is one of the loneliest images I've ever seen in animation or anywhere else. Enda Walsh's script never explains everything. It trusts you to feel the loss without being told exactly what was lost. And that restraint is an act of profound artistic confidence. Story 2. Then lost is truth that can't be won. The second story is, and I say this with the deepest respect, absolutely, profoundly insane. In the very best way. We jump forward in time. The century has changed. The aesthetic has shifted. The house, the same house, or a version of it, is now a renovation project. And our protagonist is an aimless developer, a rat, beautifully rendered in the stop-motion fabric aesthetic, who has purchased and is renovating the property with the intention of selling it for a significant profit. Right away, the tone is different. This story is darkly comedic in ways the first wasn't. There's an absurdist energy here, a Kafkaesque quality that is genuinely funny until it suddenly isn't. And then it's both at once, which is the most unsettling combination of all. The developer is driven, obsessed, even. He's poured everything into this renovation, time, money, identity. The house is not just a project for him, it's become the thing, the central organizing principle of his existence. He needs it to be perfect. He needs it to sell. He needs this to work. So he arranges a series of open house viewings. And here is where the story starts to unravel in the most deliciously bizarre way. Prospective buyers arrive. And from the very beginning, something is wrong. There are slightly off in ways that are hard to articulate but impossible to ignore. They don't quite move right. Their conversations are a little too strange. Their interest in the house feels excessive. Invasive. They linger in rooms where they shouldn't. They ask questions that don't quite make sense. They say things that don't quite connect to the reality around them. And the developer, anxious, desperate, running out of time and money, ignores every warning sign. He wants to make the sale. He needs to make the sale. So he rationalizes. He explains away the strangeness. He keeps the open house going even as the evidence that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong begins to pile up around him. Here's where Nika Lindrith's direction really shines. Because the second story is where the film most directly engages with the aesthetic of surrealist horror, the kind associated with Kafka, with Ionescu, with Buñuel, and Lindrith leans into it without ever fully tipping over into explicit horror. The dread is architectural. The strangeness is ambient. The wrongness is in the details. The buyers don't leave. That's the core of it. Open house after open house, the strange visitors arrive, examine the rooms, and then stay. Not aggressively. Not confrontationally. They simply don't go. They occupy the house with a kind of pleasant, oblivious persistence. They eat the developer's food. They use his spaces. They fill his rooms. They integrate themselves into the fabric of the house in a way that mirrors, not coincidentally, what the workers did to the Raymond family in the first story. And the developer tries to keep going. He keeps hosting viewings. He keeps trying to make the sale. He keeps telling himself that this is manageable, that this is temporary, that everything will work out if he just stays focused on the goal. There's a sequence, and this is one of my favorite sequences in the entire film, where the developer is showing a couple around a room that is increasingly, undeniably occupied by previous visitors, and he is still pitching the house with the cheerful urgency of someone trying to close a deal. The couple are listening, nodding, asking their slightly wrong questions, while the camera pulls back just enough to reveal the accumulated strangeness of the room around them, the evidence of all the people who never left, the layers of occupation that have built up like sediment, and it is simultaneously hilarious and terrifying. A perfect tonal balance. Now, there's something specific happening in this second story that rewards close attention, because it's easy to get swept up in the absurdist comedy and miss it. The developer is not just losing control of his property. He's losing control of his self. The obsession with the house, with the renovation, with the sale, with the validation that a successful transaction would bring, has hollowed him out as thoroughly as the Raymond family's move into the great house hollowed them out in the first story. He has made the house the center of his identity. And because the house resists him, because it keeps becoming something he didn't intend, he is left without a center. There's a bug infestation. And it's handled in a way that is grotesque and funny and weirdly moving all at once. The developer discovers that the house is infested, not with something straightforward, not with something that can be simply exterminated, but with something that has become part of the house itself. Something that belongs there now, even if he never invited it. And his efforts to address it, to fix it, to maintain the fiction that everything is under control, they failed. They all failed. Every single one. The story builds to an ending that is, in its own way, as devastating as the first, though the emotional register is completely different. By the end, the developer is alone in the house. He has exhausted everything to prepare. The buyers never materialized. The renovation has taken on a life of its own. The house has won, in that quiet, inevitable way that the house always seems to win. And he sits in the house defeated. And the film, in a grace note that I think is brilliant, doesn't judge him for it. It just witnesses him sitting in the thing he built, or tried to build, surrounded by everything his ambition cost him. Story 3. Listen again and seek the sun. The third story is where the house reveals its deepest ambitions. And it is, I will say this clearly and without hesitation, the most emotionally complete of the three. The most hopeful, though a complicated, hard-won hope. The most human, despite, or perhaps because of, the fact that its characters are all anthropomorphic cats. We're in the future now. Or a future. A world where the sea has risen, not dramatically, not apocalyptically, but steadily, inexorably. The great house sits on an island, mostly submerged, surrounded by a world that is slowly, quietly drowning. And our protagonist is Rosa, a landlord cat who owns the house and its few remaining, semi-flooded rooms. She's renting out the spaces that aren't underwater yet to a small group of eccentric tenants. And she is, herself, a study in contained sadness and stubborn hope. Rosa has plans. Ambitions. She wants to restore the house. She wants to reverse its decline. She has a vision for what the house could be again, what it was, presumably, before the water came, and she is working toward that vision with a kind of quiet, desperate determination that is enormously sympathetic and also, clearly, unsustainable. Her tenants are a beautiful collection of half-finished people. There's Elias and Jen, a couple who live on the upper floor and who are, in a perfectly observed characterization, so absorbed in their own artistic pursuits, their own creative obsessions, that they've essentially disengaged from the reality of the world around them. They make things. They create. And their creation is a way of not looking at the water, not looking at the house's decline, not looking at the question that Rosa is slowly being forced to confront. Then there's Cosmos. Cosmos is the most immediately compelling character in the third story, a single tenant who has embraced the water, who has found a kind of peace with the world as it is rather than as it was. Cosmos floats. Cosmos adapts. Cosmos is not in denial. And Rosa looks at Cosmos and doesn't quite know what to make of him, because everything he represents is in direct opposition to everything she's been working toward. The tension of the third story is internal. It's not about buyers or aristocrats or workers who don't leave. It's about Rosa herself, about the choice she has to make, the understanding she has to reach, the letting go that is required of her. And Paloma Baez's direction of this segment is exquisite. The visual storytelling is patient and achingly beautiful. The colors are different here, softer, more washed out in some ways, but with a brightness that occasionally breaks through that feels genuinely earned. There's a moment where Rosa goes into the water. And it's played with a simplicity and a beauty that caught me completely off guard. She goes into the water that has been her enemy, the rising tide that represents everything that's going wrong with her house, her plans, her life, and she discovers that it's okay. It's not what she feared. It's not the end of everything. It's just water. It's just change. But here's where the third story gets really interesting, because it doesn't let Rosa off the hook that easily. The tenants are behind on rent. All of them. And Rosa needs the money to fund her restoration plans. And she is genuinely conflicted, genuinely divided between her obligation to the house, or rather, her attachment to the idea of the house, and her obligation to the people who live in it. The human, or cat, complexity here is real. Rosa is not a villain for wanting to be paid. She's not a saint for wanting to restore the house. She's just a person, trying to navigate a situation that doesn't have a clean answer. There's a scene between Rosa and Elias that is one of the most quietly painful exchanges in the film. Because they're both right about different things, and they both know it, and they can't quite bridge the gap between their respective realities. Elias creates beauty out of nothing and can't find the money to pay his rent. Rosa needs the rent to do something that Elias thinks is futile. They look at each other across an unbridgeable distance, and somehow, the film is very good at this. You love them both. As the third story moves toward its conclusion, Rosa reaches a crossroads. The house, the literal, physical house, is sinking. There is a point at which restoration is no longer possible. At which the thing you've been trying to preserve cannot be preserved. And Paloma Baez handles this with remarkable restraint and grace. She doesn't make Rosa's acceptance melodramatic. She doesn't give us a big cathartic breakdown. She gives us something quieter and truer. She gives us a woman, a cat, but functionally a woman, sitting with the thing she's lost, and then, slowly, turning to look at the world that remains. The ending of the house, the ending of this third story, which is the ending of the whole film, is one of the most quietly beautiful things I've seen in years. Rosa and her tenants, floating in the water around the half-submerged house, on makeshift rafts, looking at the horizon together. And there's a moment that is played without dialogue, without explanation, without any of the narrative machinery that lesser films would employ to make sure you understood the significance. They are free of the house. The house is beneath them, or behind them, and they are on the water, and the water is the world now, and the world, even changed, even unfamiliar, even requiring adaptation, is not nothing. It's something to live in. Section 4, Character and Performance Analysis. What makes the house work as deeply as it does is that its characters, despite being fabric-covered stop-motion figures, despite being rats and cats and Victorian humans made of wool, are profoundly, unmistakably real. Let's talk about Mabel first, because she is the emotional heart of the first story and, in many ways, of the entire film. Mabel is rendered with extraordinary care by both the animation team and the voice actress Mia Goth, who brings a quality to the performance that is hard to describe but immediately felt. There's a watchfulness to Mabel. A quietness that is not passivity but attention. She observes. She processes. She understands things that adults around her refuse to understand, and she carries that understanding with a kind of resigned sadness that is devastating in a child character. What's interesting about Mabel psychologically is that she is not the naive innocent who doesn't grasp danger. She grasps it perfectly. Her horror is not the horror of someone who doesn't know what's happening, it's the horror of someone who knows exactly what's happening and has no power to stop it. That is a specific, adult kind of horror, and the fact that it's centered in a child makes it more acute, more painful, more resonant. Her father Raymond, voiced by Matthew Good, is a character I keep returning to because his failure is the most comprehensible kind. He doesn't fail through malice or stupidity. He fails through love and weakness, through his desire to give his family something better, through his susceptibility to his wife's ambitions, through his inability to hold on to what his gut was telling him when Van Schoonbeek first appeared. Raymond is the person who knows the thing is wrong and does it anyway. And there's not a person watching this film who can say with complete certainty that they wouldn't do the same. The second story's protagonist, the rat developer, voiced by Jarvis Cocker in a performance of remarkable comedic restraint, is fascinating in a different way. He's not particularly sympathetic in the way that Raymond is, or Rosa is. He's more of a type, the driven entrepreneur, the self-made striver, the man who has decided that his worth is measured by this one project's success. But Linrith and Cocker resist the temptation to make him cartoonishly shallow. There's a scene where he's alone in the house, just him and the sounds it makes, the creaks and shifts and almost voices, and in those quiet moments you see something underneath the ambition. You see the person who was there before the obsession took over. And it's just enough to break your heart a little. Helena Bonham Carter's voice work in this segment is also worth noting. She plays a character who is difficult to describe without spoiling the specific nature of the strangeness, but her vocal performance is pitched at exactly the right frequency, simultaneously warm and wrong, friendly and uncanny, and it's one of those voice performances that lingers in the back of your mind long after the credits roll. Rosa, voiced by Susan Wokoma with a warmth and an intelligence that elevates every scene she's in, is the most complex character in the film and, I'd argue, the most important. Her arc is the one that the whole anthology has been building toward, even if it doesn't feel that way while you're watching the first two stories. Rosa is carrying everything: the house, the history of the house, the weight of what the house means, the burden of trying to preserve something while the world moves on without her. What Wokoma does with this role is remarkable. She doesn't play Rosa as tragic, even though the character's situation is objectively quite sad. She plays her as someone who is trying. Actively, stubbornly, lovingly trying. And there's something about that quality, that active, effortful, human trying, that makes Rosa's eventual letting go feel not like defeat but like growth. Like arrival. Cosmos, voiced by Paul Kaye, deserves a paragraph of his own because he is, in the third story, the character who says the things that no one else is willing to say. He's gentle about it, not preachy, not self-righteous, but he represents a truth that Rosa is working her way toward, and Kaye plays him with a kind of serene, unhurried confidence that is both infuriating and deeply appealing. He's someone who has already done the work Rosa is in the middle of doing. And he has the graciousness to not rub it in. Section 5, Themes, Symbolism and Subtext. Alright. We're going deeper now. Because The House is a film that works beautifully on the surface level, as a collection of haunting, gorgeous, emotionally resonant stories, but it's when you start pulling at the threads that the full richness of what Enda Walsh and the three directors have constructed becomes apparent. The House as Desire. At the most fundamental thematic level, The House is a film about the nature of desire. Specifically, about the way that wanting something, a home, a success, a life, can consume the wanting person more completely than any external force ever could. In the first story, Raymond doesn't need the great house. His family is not suffering in the cottage. They have what they need. But they want more. Or rather, and this is the crucial distinction: Penny wants more, and Raymond wants Penny to be happy. And that wanting, that desire for something grander and more impressive, is what the house exploits. It enters through the gap that desire created. In the second story, the developer wants the sale. He wants the validation. He wants to have done the thing, to have turned the renovation into a success. And his desire for that outcome blinds him to every warning sign. The house doesn't trap him from the outside, it traps him from the inside, by finding the desire he already carries. Rosa's desire is different, more sympathetic, more poignant. She desires continuity. She desires for the past to persist, for the house that she inherited to remain what it was. And that desire, which is really a desire for stability, for permanence in a world that refuses to stand still, is just as capable of consuming her as the more overtly ambitious desires of the characters before her. The house's class and aspiration. The first story is unmistakably a story about class. About the seductiveness of elevation, of moving up, of leaving behind one's origins for something more impressive. Van Schoonbeek's offer is the ultimate aspirational fantasy, someone from above reaching down and pulling you up, and the film is unsparing about what that fantasy costs. What the Raymond family loses is not just a cottage. They lose their authentic relationship with their own lives. They lose the texture and the meaning of their modest existence. They gain grandeur and lose themselves. And the film is very clear that this is a trade, not a theft. A trade that Raymond and Penny made with open eyes, or eyes they kept deliberately shut. This is one of the oldest critiques of social aspiration in Western literature. You can trace it from Dickens through Fitzgerald, through any number of contemporary stories about people who climb and discover that the top of the ladder is not what they imagined. But the house does something interesting with it by not turning Raymond into a villain for wanting to climb. The sympathy is maintained even as the loss is mourned. The house has the impossibility of control. The second story is where the theme of control, and the futility of it, comes to the foreground. The developer wants to control the house. To make it what he needs it to be. To direct the outcome. And the house, through the bizarre, inexplicable behavior of its visitors, refuses to cooperate. It has its own agenda. Its own momentum. And all his attempts to manage it, to correct it, to force it back into the shape he requires, they fail, one after another, with darkly comic inevitability. There's something almost Buddhist about this. The developer suffers not because the world is cruel but because he refuses to accept the world as it is. His attachment to a particular outcome, the successful sale, the perfect renovation, is the source of his suffering. And the house, in its uncanny, surrealist way, keeps presenting him with reality. Keeps saying, this is what's actually here. This is what's actually happening. And he keeps refusing to see it. Rising waters and climate change. The third story is the most directly allegorical, and its central image, the rising sea, the slowly sinking house, the world underwater, is clearly, unmistakably about climate change. About a world that has changed in ways that require not just adaptation but a fundamental rethinking of what we value, what we hold on to, and what we have to be willing to release. Rosa's refusal to accept the house's fate, her insistence on restoration when the facts on the ground argue for acceptance and adaptation, mirrors a very specific kind of human response to environmental change. The response that says, we can fix this. We can return to what was. We can preserve the old world inside the new one. And the film, gently but clearly, argues that this response, however understandable, is not sufficient. That the new world requires new ways of living in it. But, and this is crucial, it's not pessimistic about this. The third story doesn't say, give up, it's hopeless. It says, let go of the house. Not of life. Not of community. Not of connection. Just of the specific, fixed thing that the house represents. Let go of that and find out what's still there. Wool and flesh, the stop-motion aesthetic as metaphor. I want to spend a moment on something that is easy to overlook but that I think is deeply intentional. The stop-motion aesthetic of the house, the wool and fabric quality of the figures, the handmade texture of the world, creates a specific kind of relationship between the viewer and the story. Stop-motion animation is, by nature, about making something move that shouldn't move. About animating the inanimate. And there's an uncanniness to it, an awareness that what you're watching is constructed, assembled, made by human hands, that runs through everything in the house and gives it a slightly dreamlike, slightly wrong quality that is absolutely essential to its effect. The wall, specifically, suggests something interesting. Wool is warm. Wool is domestic. Wool is the material of sweaters and blankets and the things we make to protect ourselves from the cold. And these characters are made of it. They are, in a sense, the same material as comfort. And yet the stories they inhabit are deeply uncomfortable. There's a tension there, between the tactile warmth of the medium and the emotional cold of the stories, that operates on a subliminal level and contributes enormously to the film's overall effect. Foreshadowing and callbacks. Enda Walsh's script is full of subtle connections between the three stories that reward attentive viewers. The house itself, of course, is the most obvious callback, the same structure, evolved across time, carrying the weight of all its previous inhabitants. But there are details within the stories that rhyme and echo in interesting ways. The way that people in all three stories fail to leave when they should. The way that desire in each story is expressed through an attachment to a physical space. The way that the characters who see clearly, Mabel in the first, Cosmos in the third, are the characters who are least attached to the house's promise. The way that each story ends with its protagonist in a fundamentally altered relationship with the concept of home. These are not coincidences. They're a carefully constructed web of thematic repetition that makes the house something more than three separate stories. It makes it an argument. A sustained, multi-chapter examination of a single question: what does it cost us to want a home? Section 6, Technical and Artistic Review. I want to spend real time here, because the technical and artistic achievement of the house is something that deserves serious recognition. Direction. Having three directors on an anthology film is a risky proposition. The risk is that the film feels fractured, inconsistent, like a collection of shorts that happen to share a theme rather than a unified artistic statement. The house avoids this problem, not by making the three segments feel identical, but by making each one feel like a distinct variation on the same fundamental aesthetic and thematic language. Emma DeSwaff and Mark James Rulsch, who directed the first story, have a background in short film that shows in the best possible way. Their segment is the most classically structured, the most narratively coherent, the most immediately emotionally accessible. But within that relative accessibility, they've created images of extraordinary power and strangeness. The dinner party sequence, which I mentioned earlier, is direction at the highest level, a scene that communicates volumes about class, belonging, and loss without a word of explicit dialogue on the subject. Nika Lindrith's second story is where the film takes its biggest stylistic risk. The shift toward absurdist comedy, toward Kafkaesque surrealism, could have been jarring after the gothic seriousness of the first segment. But Lindrith makes it work by maintaining the same fundamental commitment to discomfort that the first story established. The discomfort is just expressed through a different emotional register, through anxiety and dark humor rather than dread and grief. Paloma Baez's third story is, arguably, the most technically demanding of the three. It requires the animation team to render water, complex, reflective, moving water, as a consistent, present element of the environment in a way that stop-motion animation doesn't typically accommodate easily. And they've done it beautifully. The water in the third story has a quality, still and melancholy and somehow full of possibility, that is one of the film's most remarkable visual achievements. Cinematography. The cinematography, if we can use that term for stop-motion animation, which we absolutely can, is consistently stunning throughout all three segments. The camera moves with a deliberateness that feels intentional at every moment. There are no casual camera choices here. Every frame is composed with a painterly care that reflects the artistic sensibility of a team that took the visual language of the film very seriously. The use of lighting, in particular, is extraordinary. Each story has a distinct lighting palette that reinforces its emotional register. The first story is lit like a 19th century oil painting, warm and golden and slightly too perfect, which makes the encroaching coldness of the house's wrongness all the more apparent by contrast. The second story uses a cooler, more functional light, the kind you'd find in a real estate brochure, that gives way to something stranger and more expressionistic as the story progresses. And the third story is bathed in the blue-grey light of a world covered in water, with moments of warmth breaking through that feel genuinely earned by their context. Sound design and music. The sound design of the house is one of its most underappreciated elements. The house itself sounds different in each story, its creaks and sighs and ambient hums change to reflect the story and the era, and that attention to sonic character makes it feel genuinely like a living thing. A character in its own right. The music, composed by Gustavo Santaolalla and Ninita Desai, is spare and haunting. It doesn't try to tell you how to feel. It doesn't swell at the emotional peaks in the way that Hollywood scores typically do. Instead, it sits beneath the stories like a ground, like something that is always there even when you're not consciously listening to it. And that understatement is exactly right for a film that trusts its images and its performances to carry the emotional weight. There's a musical moment in the transition between the first and second story, a brief, spare, almost eerie passage, that is one of my favorite things in the entire film. It acknowledges the leap in time, in world, in everything, without quite explaining it. It simply notes, we are somewhere else now. And that's enough. Standout sequences. If I had to identify the single most accomplished sequence in the house from a technical standpoint, I think it would be the dinner party in the first story. The precision with which the stop-motion team has animated the social dynamics of that scene, the postures, the glances, the micro-expressions in these wall fabric faces that somehow communicate shame and longing and desperate performance, is astonishing. They've taken a medium that is inherently limited in its range of facial expression and used it to communicate subtleties that most live-action films fail to achieve. Close runner-up, the water sequence at the end of the third story. The image of the cats on their rafts, the house half submerged around them, the water glittering in the light, it is a visual poem, and it is composed with the confidence of filmmakers who know exactly what they're doing. Section 7, Critical Review and Comparisons. Alright, let's be honest now. Let's be fully, specifically honest about where the house succeeds, where it challenges, and where it might not be for everyone. What it gets unambiguously right. First, the tonal consistency across three very different stories is a genuine achievement. Anthology films fail when one segment is so much stronger or weaker than the others that the whole thing feels uneven. The house maintains a remarkably consistent level of quality across all three, even as the specific emotional registers vary significantly. This is primarily a credit to Enda Walsh's unifying script, but it's also a credit to the directors for trusting the framework enough to bring their individual visions to it without breaking its coherence. Second, the stop-motion animation is genuinely world-class. And I'm saying this as someone who has seen a lot of stop-motion animation, from classic Leica productions like Coraline and Paranorman to the work of the Key brothers to Wes Anderson's fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs. The aesthetic of the house, the wool fabric, the attention to texture, the slightly wrong way the characters move, is distinct and fully realized and used with great intelligence. It's not just a stylistic choice, it's a thematic one. The medium serves the story. Third, the thematic ambition. The house wants to say something. It has ideas about desire and class and time and the way we attach ourselves to places, and it expresses those ideas with clarity and intelligence without ever becoming didactic or preachy. That balance, between thematic substance and narrative entertainment, is genuinely difficult to achieve, and this film achieves it. Where it challenges, and whether those challenges are features or bugs. The second story is, and I think most viewers who've seen the film would agree, the most difficult segment. Its absurdist humor requires a specific kind of engagement. If you're not attuned to that wavelength, if the Kafkaesque bizarreness feels alienating rather than darkly funny, the segment can feel like the weakest of the three. I personally love it and think it's doing exactly what it intends to do, but I understand why it divides opinion. The film also requires active engagement in a way that passively watched films don't. You can't have this on in the background. You can't multitask and still get what it's offering. It demands your attention, your patience, your willingness to sit with ambiguity and not quite resolution. For some viewers, that's a feature. For others, it's frustrating. The first story's ending, in particular, is deliberately unresolved in a way that might feel unsatisfying to viewers expecting closure. What exactly happens to the Raymond family? What was Van Schoonbeek's true purpose? What does the house ultimately do to them? The film doesn't answer these questions. It leaves them open, which is the right artistic choice, but right artistic choices are not always satisfying ones. Comparisons. The house naturally invites comparison with other anthology films of literary and thematic ambition. Amores Perros is a three-part structure organized around a shared theme, though its realism is obviously entirely different. Krzysztof Kieslowski's Decalogue, 10 films organized around the 10 Commandments, is another obvious reference point for the idea of thematic anthology filmmaking done at the highest level. In the animation space, the closest comparison is probably Coraline, also a stop-motion film about a house that offers something seductive and turns out to be dangerous, also a film for adults masquerading as a film for young audiences, also deeply concerned with the way that comfort and menace can occupy the same space. But the house is more fragmented, more formally experimental, more committed to ambiguity than Coraline. You might also think of Yorgos Lanthimos' work, The Lobster, The Favorite, Dogtooth, in relation to the second story specifically. That same deadpan quality, that same refusal to explain the strangeness, that same world in which bizarre things happen with the matter-of-fact acceptance of everyone involved. And in terms of its themes of place and belonging and the way our relationship to our homes defines us, there are interesting connections to be drawn with films as different as Hereditary, The Others, and even Parasite, Bong Joon-ho's masterpiece about class, space, and the way architecture expresses social hierarchy. The house is in good company, and it holds its own. Section 8, Final Verdict and Ending. So we've been through all 3 stories. We've examined the characters, the themes, the technique. We've talked about what works, what challenges, what lingers. What does the house actually mean? What does it leave you with when the credits roll and the screen goes dark? I think, and I've thought about this a great deal, that the house is fundamentally a film about the relationship between what we want and who we are. About the way that our desires can define us more completely than our choices, more completely than our actions, more completely than the things that happen to us. About the way that we build, or accept, or obsess over, or try to restore, places and things and achievements as a way of answering the question, who am I? What do I deserve? Where do I belong? And the answer the house arrives at, through 3 different stories across 3 different eras, through fairy tale gothic horror and Kafkaesque absurdism and near-future water-soaked melancholy, is something like, you are not the house. You are not the project. You are not the restoration plan. You are the person who is still standing, or floating, when those things are gone. And the world, even changed, even unfamiliar, even requiring adaptation and acceptance and the surrender of what you thought you needed, the world is still there. Still full of possibility. Still, just barely, still full of the warmth that you were always looking for in the wrong places. It's a hopeful film, in the end. I know it doesn't always feel that way while you're watching it. It's quiet and strange and sometimes deliberately withholding. But the ending of the 3rd story, Rosa on the raft, her tenants around her, the house beneath the water where it belongs now, is one of the most genuinely hopeful endings I've encountered in recent cinema. Not because everything is fine. Not because the house is saved or the sale is made or the family stays in the cottage. But because the people are still there, together, looking at the horizon, and the horizon is open. Who is this film for? The house is for anyone who has ever wanted something badly enough to compromise who they are to get it. Anyone who has ever stood in a place that was supposed to make them happy and felt, despite everything, empty. Anyone who has ever had to decide whether to hold on or let go, and understood in their gut that letting go might be the braver choice. It's for fans of unconventional animation, for people who loved Coraline or Isle of Dogs or the Key Brothers or anything that treats the animated medium as capable of profound artistic expression rather than just family entertainment. It's for fans of literary horror, of Kafka, of fairy tales in the original, pre-Disney sense, the sense in which fairy tales were dark and strange and full of morals that cut like knives. It is not for viewers who require narrative resolution, who prefer their themes explicit, who find ambiguity frustrating rather than provocative. And that's okay. That's a legitimate viewing preference. But if you're willing to meet the film on its own terms, to bring your patience and your attention and your willingness to sit with something that doesn't completely explain itself, I believe the house will reward you in ways that will persist long after you've moved on to other things. Final rating. I'm giving the house a 9.2 out of 10. That 0.8 deduction is for the second story's potential to alienate viewers who aren't attuned to its particular wavelength, and for a very occasional moment where the deliberate pacing tips, just barely, into something that feels like withholding rather than restraint. But those are minor reservations about a film that is, in every meaningful sense, a masterpiece of its medium and its moment. A film that knows exactly what it wants to be and achieves it with extraordinary consistency and care. A film that asks difficult questions about desire and place and time and loss, and answers them not with easy comfort but with something rarer and more valuable, with honesty, and with hope. The House is a film I will carry with me. I suspect you will too. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. If you made it all the way through this breakdown, genuinely, thank you. This kind of film deserves this kind of attention, and the fact that you're here, watching a 75-minute deep dive into a stop-motion Netflix anthology film that most people walked right past, that tells me everything I need to know about why I do this. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. Hit that like button if the review added something to your experience of the film, or if it convinced you to watch it for the first time. Leave a comment below, I read every one of them, and tell me, what did the house mean to you? Until next time. Watch something that makes you feel something. I'll see you in the dark.